All right, to close out this particular chapter, I want to tell you the two basic functions of statistics, but I want to encourage you to not think of these as separate. They are interrelated and they feed upon each other. So descriptive statistics are statistics that describes samples. So it might ask the question, what do our data look like? If I survey an employee about their morale, what does the distribution of the data look like? How many, I could do things like frequency counts. I could do things like percentages. The idea is that I have a large set of data and I compute statistics from that data that describe what's happening in my problem domain. The second kind of use of statistics is to use those descriptive statistics to make inferences or to inform decision making about larger populations. This is inferential statistics, which is the about second half of this course. In inferential statistics, we're using what we know from samples to test hypotheses that we want to generalize to the larger population. So back to our morale example. Say I discover that a democratic leadership style actually does increase morale. To the extent that increases in morale translate to decreased company turnover, that's a decision that has a very expensive bottom line when it comes to application. Employees that have high morale are likely to stay, and employees that stay cost companies a lot less money because we're not needing to constantly think about replacing them. And so once I know in one sample that a democratic leadership style actually does increase morale, then I want to infer from that sample that if I train my leaders in these other company branches, that it's going to increase their morale as well. So we always need to be careful about generalizing the results on a single study to a large population. So it's never okay to say, look, I looked at this one case, and in this one situation, my democratic leadership style increased morale. Therefore, it's going to work for everyone. That's a logical fallacy. We want to make sure that we are looking in multiple samples before we make generalizations about a larger conclusion. And so a few caveats as we close up this chapter. There are different research objectives, and depending on what those objectives are, you're going to use different procedures. So if you want to very tightly answer the question, what exactly is it about a situation that's going to increase performance or decrease performance, then you might want to do an experiment that gives you a lot of control over all of the variables that are involved. But if I instead just want to have a general overlay of the environment, a survey might be more appropriate. If I don't know what it is that I'm looking at all, if I need to check my assumptions about what morale looks like, for example, then participant observation or content analysis might be the most appropriate because I'm not necessarily asking my participants anything. They're providing me with data that I can then use to build my understanding about what I'm looking at. Second, how I measure the variables defines the statistical procedures that can be used. When I have large groups of data, I can reduce that to a single value that's representative of the group using a descriptive measure like an average. And then I use that average to then draw inferences about the larger population. So this method of drawing inferences is fundamental to the research process, but it's also a very far from perfect process. Anytime that we're making inferences based on what we observe to what we don't observe, we're opening ourselves up for potential sources of bias and error. But as long as we're aware of how that works and we're careful in our articulation of our decisions, then we're able to move forward. Now, I want to remind you, now that you're at the end of the first week or the first module of the course, that you really should get started in the second module before next week, because the next module covers 3 chapters instead of just 1. Also, please be advised that just to remind you, you really do need to pay significant attention to the book as well as the lectures. The lectures are meant to be kind of broad strokes through the material. The real detail that you'll need for the assessments is included in the book and activities therein.